All right, so it is September, and September is the beginning of a lot of things. People are getting back to school, work, final quarter of the year, but it is also Sexual Health Month. And I'm really excited because this is a topic that I have wanted to sort of dive into on the podcast and this platform, and we haven't really done so. This has been our first time, and, I've just been waiting and trying to find the right person or people to have this conversation with. So this is part one of our sexual health discussion this month of September. So joining me, I have Lydia Collins, and she is an author as well as a sexual health educator. So welcome to the podcast, Lydia. I'm so excited to have you. We're going to get right into it.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on, accepting. And, I've been sort of following your work, watching your TikToks. I love the way that you sort of like disseminate and break down sexual health information. It's so digestible. It's so easy. I understand it. It's fun. I can laugh. So, we're going to start off with just a little bit about your journey. How did you find yourself in this space of being a sexual health educator?
Yeah, well, thank you again for having me. And thank you for for following my content. I appreciate that. Honestly, I kind of ended up here based on my own experiences. I walked really aimlessly through my sex life during my teenage years. I was young, I was insecure, I was Black in a predominantly white city. I faced a lot of sexual racism. And I think really just having that be my sexual foundation and seeing how much it's impacted me, so much so that, I'm still working with my therapist years later at this big age on reclaiming my pleasure, on setting boundaries, on asking for what I want and need, on loving myself enough to stay firm in my boundaries, So going into this career was, honestly, I always tell people it's kind of my way of answering all the questions that my younger self had, but never had access to. And also, I just really like to talk about sex and sexuality and community health and self-care, and sexual health kind of encompasses all that and so much more. And so it's always been something that's been interesting to me, that's been fun. I started off doing a lot of work around consent education during my undergrad. I was part of a grassroots organization called Decolonize and Deconstruct, and we provided kind of decolonial consent education to students on campus in lecture halls and things like that. And really just wanted to kind of bring a perspective to sexual health that showed that as people of color, our experiences with sexual health look different based on race, and that race is a key component to sexual health and to our sexual experiences, right? And so, that's always been my approach to my work, just in general in sexual health.
I love it. And I love, when you said, a lot of it was your experience. I think that's a lot of it, especially as women of color, Black women, a lot of finding ourselves in this space, even of having this conversation to demystify sex and sexual education comes from our experience, comes from the shame that's attached to sex, comes from not really having these discussions in your household or your close communities. And then, searching for information elsewhere, So I honestly, you're doing a great work. It's needed. Keep it going.
Thank you.
And so before we sort of get into the main part of our conversation, I want to sort of touch on, this platform is called But What Do I Know for a reason. And we, explore moments, but what do I know moments of dubdom, where, myself or our guests may have experienced some doubts on, any facet or aspect of life. And so I'm wondering if you experienced any moments of doubt when it comes to, whether it be sex, sexual health, sexual education, where you were like, damn, what do I know about this? And and how did you, overcome that? Because I can tell you, I've had many of those.
Girl, every day. I have that moment every single day, multiple times, especially as a workshop facilitator and as an educator, and even doing social media content too with sexual health, right? Like there's people who might come in the comments and be like, hey, here's another way to think of it as well. Or here's my experience, or here's a part that you didn't consider. And then I'll be like, oh, dang, I didn't even think of that. Like, what do I know? Why are they listening to me? Or, in workshops where people might fact check and be like, hey, actually, just so you know, this is what it is. And I think especially in my sector of sexual health and doing a lot of work in community health as well, things and language is always changing, like especially around gender, around sexuality. Like things are always changing as they should, right? And so there's new terms that are always coming out. There's even new resources that are always coming out. Like when I tell, sometimes older generations that I work with, when I tell them about dental dams or internal condoms, sometimes they're like, what? Like we did not have this 20 years ago when I was growing up, or at least we didn't know about it, right? I'll hear that a lot. So I constantly have those kinds of, but what do I know moments? But I always try to really reiterate to people, even when I'm doing any kind of educational work, that I'm not an expert in anything but my own experience. And nobody's an expert in anything but their own experience. So regardless of how many degrees someone has or how many, what they do or how much they've read about experience, your experience better than anyone else. And that's all that you can really claim to be an expert in. And that's okay.
Lydia, won't you just preach? Honestly, I love that you said that, because I think, especially you mentioned your sector, and that's something that, we're going to touch on as we get further into this conversation. But language, when it comes to gender, when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to how fluid sexuality is, and the types of conversations that we're able to have now that we were not able to have just years ago, I think there has to be space for people to say, for people to fact check you, for people to be okay being fact checked. And then, for calling in, calling out. I know people and now that kind of stuff might be messy. And I know some people are scared to ask questions, to even have conversations like this. Cause you're like, man, like, how do we, but I'm really glad that you mentioned that. Cause that's something that a lot of us are having doubts with. Like, am I saying the right thing? Am I misgendering? Am I, so it definitely happens. It happens. And like you said, we're only an expert on our own experience. Girl, I'm about to get that tatted.
Matching tattoos.
Oh my goodness. All right. So let's get into the fun stuff. I want us to start by breaking down some sexual health myths. And some people might be listening to this like, shit, I know all this. These are all myths to me. Well, trust me, there's someone out there that may be confused about this. So the first one, STIs and STDs can't be caught from oral sex. Myth or not?
Yes. So that is a very common myth, actually. And a lot of people think that they've like hacked the code and they're like, I won't have unprotected penetrative sex, but I will have unprotected oral sex and everything will be fine. And I will say oral sex is considered, very low risk or theoretical risk when it comes to, bloodborne infections like HIV. Like realistically, unless you have maybe cuts in your mouth or something like that, it's considered more low risk for HIV to be transmitted that way. However, oral sex is considered high risk for, bacterial infections. So something like chlamydia or gonorrhea, right? So it's really important to, use flavored condoms or dental dams during oral sex. And honestly, to make sure that you and your partners are getting tested regularly. Because I know a lot of people are like, I don't want to use a condom during oral sex. And I'm not here to judge anybody on what they choose to do. For me, it's more about just giving people the tools to make informed decisions. So getting regularly tested or using these protective barrier methods is really important, because you can catch an STI from oral sex.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. All right. Number 2, all STIs and STDs have recognizable symptoms.
Actually a myth, and it's actually quite the opposite. So a lot of STIs do come with no symptoms at all, which is why getting tested is actually the only way to really know your status. So there's people who, HIV can live in the body for, I think, up to, or you can go undiagnosed for up to 10 years, right? Wow. Which is more rare, but it's not something that people are always going to easily notice. And a lot of times, with a lot of things, sometimes symptoms are so similar to other symptoms. So you might think you just have cold or flu-like symptoms, right? That's why it's so important to get tested, because you might not realize, oh, I've been having this. Maybe it's just a UTI, or maybe I'm having cold or flu symptoms. Maybe it's just a cold or a flu, right? You wouldn't think of anything more severe than that. And we're often so quick to think about physical health and mental health and go to the doctor and say, hey, this hurts. I don't know why, but let me go I need an x-ray, or I need you to check this out. But we won't ever think, oh, I'm not feeling great. When's the last time I've been tested? Who's the last sexual partner I've had? Do I know when they've been tested? So, really making sure that getting tested regularly if you're sexually active is super key, because that's really the only way to know your status.
Yeah. Okay. This third one. I know a lot of people have tried to figure this one out. Okay. Sperm can only live for a short time after release in the vagina.
So I'm no science expert.
Yeah,
However,
neither am I. Disclaimer.
One thing that I do know is that as long as the sperm is alive, fertilization is possible. And the sperm can, last, and fertilization can happen anywhere up to 5 days after conception.
Yes. Yep. There it is. 5 days.
5 days after it's been released. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Final one. For those of us with vaginas, specifically, douching is necessary to keep the vagina clean. Let's just end this once and for all. No, it ain't. No, it ain't.
And it's funny because whenever I get this question now, I always have like this flashback of me in like high school buying, what's it called? Vagisil, or thinking that like that was the way. I don't know what I thought I was going to do. And then being like, why am I getting yeast infections every time I use this? But yeah, douching actually, it messes with your vagina's natural pH balance. And the thing about the vagina, because it's a self-cleaning organ, is that it has healthy bacteria that's needed to be kept around in order to keep it clean. So when you're throwing off your pH balance and putting things up there that don't need to be up there, it can cause some issues, right? So honestly, it's one of those things where less is more. Again, it's a self-cleaning organ. So while you might use some gentle soap around your vulva, so the outer area, like the part that you can easily see, for the easiest way to describe it without getting into scientific terms, that outer part you might clean up, but for the inner part, the actual vagina itself, you don't need to be putting anything up there except for maybe some water, just to keep it fresh and clean.
I like that you specified, please clean your vulva, but let the vagina do what the vagina does.
Well, and I think a lot of people don't, and it's fair. Like, not everybody understands the difference sometimes.
Exactly.
So, I remember seeing like a TikTok debate, and this girl was like, "You guys aren't cleaning your vaginas. That's nasty. I use soap on mine all the time." Da 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 da. But I think she was talking about her vulva.
Her vulva, yes,
right? So it's like, yes, of course you clean that outer area, but like you don't put soap inside of yourself.
Yeah,
right?
Please don't do it. All right. So before we go any further, I just want to offer, just a quick disclaimer. I wanted to just towards the beginning of our conversation and just say, listen, I know that sex is something that's a taboo for some people. Some people are open to these conversations more so than others, but I feel like it's important to have these discussions because whether you are abstaining, you are celibate, you are waiting for marriage, you are busting it open for a real one, it is important because the more we're able to have these conversations, the more we can, demystify and equip ourselves with education that'll help us advocate for our own pleasure. And, it goes beyond what we hear in rap songs or talking about, riding it, this, that, licking and sucking and all of that, or what these podcasts are telling us who's eating whose ass and all that stuff. Like, that's all great. But sometimes we also need to know how to advocate for ourselves. So this is something that you do. This is a big part of your work. And I'm interested to know, over the years that you've been doing this work, are you noticing any tides changing, especially when it comes to women? Are you noticing that as you talk to women, that we're able to speak up for ourselves more and advocate for our pleasure, our wants, our needs when it comes to sex? Like, what are you noticing?
Mm-hmm. Well, firstly, I love that you also mentioned the fact that whether you're abstaining, whether you're not sexually active, or whether you are, this information is still important regardless, because a lot of times I feel like I used to hear people say, well, I haven't had sex yet, so I don't need to worry about this. But it also always makes me think of the fact that sexual health is so much more broader than just sex. Like, sex itself is like kind of one small part of what I actually talk about in my work. I'm not a sex therapist. I'm not a sexologist. I don't do, relationship counseling. Like, the sex part is actually more of a smaller part of what I really talk about in my work regularly. For me, it's more about the ability to advocate for yourself, right? So all of the things that fall under sexual health, like understanding sexual racism, gender, sexuality, tackling things like ableism in sex and sexual health, like all these different kinds of things, trying to make these topics more accessible for people. Healthy relationships, body confidence, like these are all things that come up as well in sexual health. So reminding people that whether you're having sex or not, it doesn't mean that sexual health education isn't necessary for you. And like you said, or you asked if I see things really changing in the years that I've been doing this work. And absolutely.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah, especially in the content creation work that I do. Like these TikTok kids they're out here, they're posting stuff about their periods and about, UTIs and about understanding the difference between vulvas and vaginas and talking about healthy boundaries and things that I did not have the language for even 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. And so it's really, really cool to see, of course, the internet can be such a blessing and a curse. It can be, a really heavy place, a really overwhelming place, a really scary place sometimes, but it also is such a hub of information, especially things like social media, where you see on TikTok, you see gynecologists, nurses, doctors, sex educators, sex therapists, like people from all different kinds of fields coming on and sharing their knowledge for free, which is something that I think a lot of us didn't have access to.
Yeah,
so,
facts.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing a change, especially among young people. I always say I've had the best workshops with like high school students. They have the best questions. They're so open, non-judgmental. They just tend to be just willing to absorb information, and they want to learn, and they want to know how they can, be the safest that they can be in regards to their sexual health, and how they can really, make informed decisions. And that's really exciting to see.
That's great. So the kids gonna be all right. That's great.
The kids gonna be all right. The kids gonna be better than we were. That's for sure.
Girl, that is, honestly. And, as part of this work that you do, consent, you've mentioned it earlier. Consent is a big, big, big part of sex and our sexual health. And so I want you to sort of give us some scenarios. I know people have probably heard a dictionary definition of what consent is, but I want you to give us some scenarios of what consent is not. Because,
I love that.
I want to get into that because I think sometimes the lines can get a little bit blurred, and it's easier to say, oh, she said yes, or he said yes, or they said yes, right? But there's some blurred lines. So if you have, one or two scenarios that you can tell us, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Hesitancy. That's a big one, right? That's not consent. So if you say, I always give the example, like if you ask someone out on a date and y'all were out on the street and you bump into someone and you're like, hey, I think you're really attractive. Do you want to go on a date? And they're like, maybe. And then you show up at their house at 6:00. That'd be weird, right?
Yeah.
And so same thing for sex, right? If that enthusiasm isn't there, if they're not as enthusiastic as you, if that yes hasn't been made clear in whatever way that looks like for you, because sometimes it's not always the word yes. Everybody has their different, sexual relationships and safe words and things that they do, especially with partners and whatever. But if that consent isn't clearly there, then it's a no. And another big one, especially as someone who does a lot of work around race and racism in the context of sexual health, sexual racism is one. Fetishization, right? So if you are only sleeping with somebody because you want to, kind of have that racial conquest, and they don't know that, right?
Girl.
They don't know that. And I know we'll get into that a little bit more later, but that's not consensual. And it took me a long time to realize that, because that was my first interaction with sex, right? At a young age, was with someone who was white, someone who I had feelings for, and then later heard him saying things like, oh, I gained my black belt.
No way.
Right. And so for me, it took me a long time to realize, and hearing more racist things that came from his mouth. And it took some time for me to realize that's not consensual. Like, no wonder my sexual foundation is so messy, because that's not consensual. Right. And so I think, again, we think of consent and we always think of extreme aggression, but sometimes a lot of times it's the manipulation or leaving out things, right? Saying, oh, I got tested, and lying about it. That's
Yeah.
not consensual. And when you don't know your status and you say you do, that's not consensual. Right.
Hmm.
So all of these different scenarios that are the scenarios that we often don't think about. We often think of
Yeah.
the, you put something in their drink or they say no and you keep
Yes.
going, right? Like most people, I
Yeah.
think, can kind of identify that as non-consent, but I
Yeah.
think there's a lot more common ones that people don't always recognize as non-consensual.
Hmm. And I'm so glad you said that because you're right. We think of it as like within these small confines, but it goes
Hmm.
beyond. Like even the sexual racism example you gave, like that's not necessarily something that happens in the bedroom or at the time of,
Right.
the sexual intercourse or whatever, but it goes beyond that. It affects how you feel and your emotions during that act too, right?
Hmm.
So
Right.
I think something I'm starting to hear more and more of, I heard it actually when I was listening to another podcast, is condom negotiation. And so it's like a fancy
Mm.
word for just the way in which I guess individuals negotiate if their male partner will use a condom. I think it should be extended to all partners in general, whether
For
any
sure.
partner is going to use a condom. But I think that's a big one too, because if you start getting into telling me that if you don't use a condom, if you use a condom, you're not going to finish, it doesn't feel as great, da 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 da
Right.
da, and then you're trying to sort of, that's not
Rationalize
consent.
it. Yeah,
Exactly,
exactly.
so that's not consent either. So I guess what are some sort of tips? Like you mentioned boundaries. What are some
Hmm.
ways that we can sort of set and maintain our boundaries in relation to consent, negotiation, and just our overall safety when it comes to sex?
Yeah. I would say for me, one thing that I often think about is the fact that the hard part isn't always, at least I know for myself, isn't
Hmm.
necessarily setting boundaries. The hard part is following through with them.
Right.
And also ensuring that there are consequences for my boundaries being um, not being respected.
Right.
That's a big one that I had to even recently really understand and say, I can sit here and like journal about all the boundaries that I have. Um, but then when it gets into the actual moment or when it comes to my romantic or my sexual life, am I enforcing those? And not only am I enforcing those, but when they're not respected, what's the consequence?
Mm.
Right? When they're not
Right.
respected, am I still giving that person access to me? Because a lot of times, yes, I have. A lot of the times I have. So, it's great to talk about the importance of setting boundaries, but I think one thing that I've had to work on is really sitting with myself and thinking, what are the consequences of that? Right?
Right.
If this boundary is not respected, I'll give you one warning, and if it's not respected again, then you will not have access to me again. Or
Mm.
maybe there's no warning, maybe it's just instantly you don't have access to me again, right? So all these different things that individuals might put in place to ensure that they're being respected and that their boundaries are being respected. Um, and I think also normalize conversations around boundaries in the bedroom. Like, I don't know why, and I think especially in regards to like hookup culture, people have this idea that these kinds of more intimate or deep conversations aren't necessary if it's just a one night stand.
Right.
But I'm like, it's almost more important then because I don't know you at all. If you're my
Mm.
partner, at least you have some context on who I am, maybe what I've been
Right.
through. If you're a
Right.
person I just met, I don't know you, you don't know me, right? And I
Right.
think, especially as someone who does a lot of work in regards to sexual violence, I can tell you
Right.
right now that there are triggers that come up for survivors of sexual violence that they might not even know they had
Mm-hmm.
until that exact moment. Flashbacks,
Yeah.
things that might come up, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, I know it's not always going to be necessarily that severe of a situation, but that's just one example of, if you're hooking up with somebody and maybe something comes up and they don't realize, oh, I need to set a boundary for that because that makes me feel uncomfortable or that reminds
Mm.
me of this. So again, people are so complex. Humans are so complex. It's okay, even if it's just a one night after the club hookup, to say, hey, what's the safe word? Do you want to
Yeah.
make a safe word? What is it? Does this feel good? Do you like this? Are you into this? Are you not into this? Or if you want to keep it simple, just say, hey, what are your non negotiables? What are things you are not willing to do? What are things that you do not want to do tonight?
Right.
Um, like when's the last time you've been tested? Have you been tested? And that question, I think people think it's a trick question of like, you need to lie and say that you've been tested yesterday. No, it's if you say no and I still choose to sleep with you, that's at least me making an informed decision.
Right.
If you say, no, I haven't gotten tested, I can say, okay, well, then I'm definitely going to make sure that we use a condom. And, maybe I'm not comfortable giving you oral sex
Yeah.
because I know that you haven't been tested. Right. Doesn't mean that they're going to get up and be like, no, I'm not going to sleep with you. And maybe they will. And that's fine too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think really just normalizing these conversations, if you're mature enough and not mature enough, but if you're ready to be and wanting to be having these kinds of sexual interactions, then it automatically needs to come with the ability to have these conversations too.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. I'm sorry, if you've grown enough to have sex, you've grown enough to talk about it. That's a really, really good point. Those are some good tips. I think the safe word, limits, what you're okay with, what you're not okay with, especially for that time. I might be okay with doing this tomorrow, but I'm not ready to do it tonight, right? So I think those are definitely good tips. So I mentioned that I follow your content, so I'm going to make reference to a couple of your TikTok videos. And so you posted a TikTok video and the caption was something along the lines of, contrary to popular heteronormative belief, sex can look like many things, and penetration is not a requirement for your sex. Your sex is valid, right? And when I read that, I said, whoo, she is saying all the things. And it's funny, I sent it to a friend of mine and I was like, do you agree with this? And she's like, you know what? Me today, I agree. Me a couple years ago, I would have been like, girl, if he's not putting it in there, what's that? Right. And I'm asking you because there are going to be some people, some penis having people that are going to be like, if I'm not sticking in something, that's not sex.
Right.
So, so I want you to sort of just, break that down for us and where that caption sort of came from for you.
Absolutely. No, I if you caught me a few years ago, I had probably said the same thing. And so over the years, I've really, really noticed through personal experience as well as through my professional work that there's really such a heteronormative idea of what sex is supposed to look like. And it often leaves queer sex out of the conversation completely. And we see it pushed a lot through the rhetoric around virginity, right? And it's been it's very clear that the idea of losing your virginity is really just a made up idea that some people are innocent and pure and some people aren't, right? It goes back to religion. It goes back to purity culture. It goes back to heteronormativity. So when we really dissect it and look at those kinds of things, we see that to be true, especially when you consider the fact that, when it comes to women loving women type sex, if I were to say the first time I had sex was with a woman, somebody probably wouldn't describe that as me losing my virginity. You see what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying.
You see what I'm saying? So the concept that there needs to be not just a man involved, but a cis man. There needs to be a penis involved. There needs to be penetration. There needs to be something broken. There needs to be a cherry popped. There needs to be something dominated in order for this to count. Right. Yeah. And so again, it completely erases all different kinds of people and the kind of sex that they're having, because a lot of people are doing a lot more, even straight people doing a lot more than just penis and vagina.
Exactly. Right? And I was about to say, I know a lot of women that the majority of our orgasms are had with clitoris.
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
not, so.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? Is sometimes sex looks like masturbation. Sometimes it looks like clit stimulation. Sometimes it looks like using toys. And I can't even define exactly what sex is or what it's supposed to look like, because it's different for everybody. Right. So everybody, a lot of times I'll get the question, as a queer woman, I'll often get the question, what does sex with a woman look like? And I'll be like, it's been different every time. Yeah. It's been completely different things. It's been many things, and it's been different than sex that I've had with men. And sometimes it looks like one thing, sometimes it looks like another, and that's okay. And it's not always penetration.
Right. This is not even on my notes, but because you said that, I was watching, I'm not sure if you followed it, City Girls, the hip hop group, Carisha Young Miami, and she interviewed Meg Thee Stallion, and they were talking about, girl, I'll fuck you too. Who's on top? Me. And it just, when you mention, people have asked you, what's sex with a woman like, it's just, can we get over the fascination with women on women sex and lesbian sex? Right. I find that we're okay with that. But then once it's two men or it's different, Whoa,
Right.
nah, bro, you doing too much. Once it's on our show,
Right.
I'm not watching it anymore. We saw that with P Valley.
Hmm.
So it's like, can we just please stop asking the
Yeah.
girls what they're doing? Stop asking if they can be your like third. Just let please.
Right. And again, it feeds into this idea that like queer women aren't real, like our relationships aren't real, like
Right?
they're not
Yeah.
valid. Like, oh, that's cute, it's a phase, but like, are you really
Yeah.
going to marry a woman and like have kids with a woman? And it's this fun phase that every like girl in college kisses another girl, or this
Mm-hmm.
idea that there needs to be a man involved in order for it to be valid, or it needs to look like it does in porn, which it rarely does.
Mm-hmm.
um, and so again, it really also invalidates the realness, and the authenticity of queer relationships, and recognizing that
Yeah.
there's so much deeper than just sex.
Yeah.
um, yeah, and again, goes back to this idea that there needs to be like a cis man involved in order for our sex, our sexuality, and even just our existence to be like legit,
Yeah. Exactly. And it's fourth male gaze still.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna shift a little bit. Part of sex, how sexual health is knowing how to take care of our bodies, knowing what works for us, what doesn't work for us. And so again, referencing your TikTok, you had made a TikTok video about explaining, how you set boundaries with your gynecologist when they were sort of, and I'm using this word because you used it, guilting you into getting back on birth control, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to offer this disclaimer. I'm not saying that people should use or not use birth control. Please use what works for you, what works for your
Right.
body. We're all different, but I think it's important to share and, hear these stories. I also think that because again, sex sometimes is such a limited conversation, then it trickles to birth control. We only talk about birth control when it's in relation to sex, and we forget the other things that it could do or not do for different people's bodies, right? So I was just
Mm-hmm.
wondering what your experience with it was like and what made you want to get off of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to clarify too that even in that TikTok, I mentioned how I wish I set boundaries with that gynecologist.
Right.
I
Yes, yes,
wish I
yes.
did.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yes, but absolutely that guilt. I felt that guilt of getting back onto it, and I often think about what I wish I would have said. And so again, like you mentioned, people's experiences with birth control are all super different. So based on my experience, I never encourage or discourage anyone to get on it. Just based on what my
Mhm.
experience with it is like or was like. Um, but for me, it wasn't a great experience. It was
Mm.
actually a pretty poor experience. I was in a hetero relationship for about 3 years when I was kind of end of teenage years up to like early 20s. And so I went on birth control, I think around the time I was 18. And it had really huge impacts on my mood. Um, Felt a lot of depression, a lot of intense mood swings, physical changes, just discomfort in my body. And I was on it for 3 years. And so when I got off of it and started to feel like myself again, um, maybe a year or so later, I went for a pap smear, and this gynecologist who was awful, but that's a story for another day, um, started making a lot of comments about, why are you not on birth control? And I'm diabetic. So she kept saying, you can't afford to have an accidental pregnancy because it'll be high risk and da 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 da. Which is fine. Like these are valid points, but just the way she went about it so quickly to assume that I was just out here having unprotected sex, or that I was having sex with men, or
Mm.
I shouldn't say men, but people with penises.
Mhm.
The fact that she was assuming that that's the kind of sex I was having, when at the time it wasn't, um, was really frustrating. And I felt like I wasn't heard, and I felt like my needs weren't heard or met. And so she constantly kept saying, just go back on it. And I told her, I really didn't feel the greatest when I was on it. Are there
Yeah.
like, I don't think it's the best option for me. And she was kind of like, I don't care, get on it,
Damn.
And so I was like, and she like wrote me a prescription. I was like, I said I didn't want it, but I was like, you know what? By the end of the appointment, I was like, whatever, let me just try this out again. I tried a different kind as well, like a different brand. So I was like, maybe it'll be a bit of a better experience. And then I got my period for like a month, and I bled for like a month straight. And I was like, this doesn't feel normal either. I know it
No
happens sometimes for
way.
people for different reasons, but I was like,
Right.
this has never happened to me, even when I was on birth control before. So I was like, you know what, this doesn't feel worth it for me. And at the time I was like
Yeah.
very much not even engaging in sex really with anybody, for about a year. So I was just kind of like, I just don't feel the need to alter the way my body feels, knowing that this is something that doesn't work well for me. Um, all for the off chance that I might have sex with someone with a penis at some point,
Yeah.
So it wasn't worth it for me. But of course, for a lot of people, it makes sense. Everybody has different experiences, and there's so many different kinds of birth control that sometimes you have to just find the one that works best for you. And maybe I would have a better experience if I tried another one, right? I only tried two.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
So I guess I can't write it off completely, but getting off of it was the best decision for me at the time, and I haven't gone back on it since. But yeah, I think more than anything for me, when it comes to that story, what I want people to take most from it is the importance of advocating for yourself. Like you said, whether you choose to go on it or not, that's up to you. That's based on what makes sense for you and for your body and for the kinds of sex you're having, the kind of relationships you're in, whatever it is. And that's all fine. Whatever works for you works for you. But it's important to know that, again, the only person who's an expert on your experience and on your body is you. So I don't care how many PhDs you have. I don't care if you're a doctor. I don't care what school you went to. I can tell you what my body felt when I was on that, and that it wasn't normal. And so if a doctor is brushing those things off and telling you, oh, we'll just try it anyway, just go on it anyway, rather than giving you alternative ideas, right? If I say, oh, I don't feel comfortable going back on birth control, are there alternatives that you think would be a better option for me? Then maybe she could have brought in other options, right? These are some protective barrier methods you could use. This is it's important to understand, your cycle and when you're ovulating and when you have the highest chance of getting pregnant versus when you have the lowest risk of getting pregnant, right? Like, why are these not conversations that came up? Why was there not a holistic approach to what I was looking to get? And that was what was most frustrating for me. That was what was hardest for me, even more so than being on birth control and having a poor experience with how it made me feel. It was just how much my needs and my feelings were just kind of brushed to the side. And I was just given a prescription and told, just do this.
Yeah. And this, so I'm going to echo what you said slightly. I had a similar negative experience with birth control. I was taking the pill ones. I can't remember the exact brand and name, but I was on the pill. So, you got to set your alarm, remember to take it every day, same time, that kind of thing. But it made me bloat. And I was actually taking it for multiple reasons. And it was really helping with my reduction of my period cramps, the intensity of my period. Like it was doing wonders in that regards, but then it just started to make me feel heavy, bloat, a little bit of weight gain. So I was like, I'm not really liking it. And I got off. And I think it just reminds us that, yes, like you mentioned, we may know our bodies better than our doctors do. And I know that that's a weird boundary to think that you have to set.
Right.
But it's important to set that. It's important to say, no, I know what I'm feeling. I know what I'm feeling. Because I've had instances not related to, periods of birth control, but where I've had to be firm with my doctor, and she's a Black woman. And I've had to tell her, Nicole, no, girl, like I'm feeling this pain.
Right.
I'm needing this. Or no, I don't want that. So I think it's a boundary that we may not have thought we'd have to set, but it's absolutely important because we need to advocate for ourselves, even with our healthcare professionals, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
For sure.
Oh yeah. And we see it every day, how Black women are kind of dismissed and pushed aside, whether it be during pregnancy and childbirth, whether it be, being misgendered for a lot of, trans women who go to, receive healthcare.
Yeah.
Like all of these different instances where Black folks, especially Black folks who are like femme identifying, are just kind of told, no, you can handle it.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, no, I actually can't. I'm not a strong Black woman. I need to be held. Give me pain medication.
Literally.
They're like, how's your pain from 1 to 10? I'm like, 11.
Literally. Now I'm saying literally. I'm like, 12. It's so bad. I don't think I can leave here. Like, oh my goodness.
Stay overnight.
Oh man. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being transparent with that experience that you had. I hope, listeners who are listening and who hear that story, take away and are able to advocate for themselves. Like we said, do what's best for your body, but just,
Yes.
just keep this in mind. So we've mentioned this word a couple of times throughout our conversation. You've thrown it out. I've said it. Sexual racism. And before I was familiar with your content and your work, I hadn't really heard this term. So I would like for you to, explain it, what it means and how it affects women of color, especially Black women. You had given your example earlier, but, we can get more into that.
Mm-hmm. No, I love this question. It's funny, not funny, haha, funny, sad,
yeah.
but sexual racism is something that so many of us have actually seen or dealt with, even though we didn't necessarily have like the language for it or to call it that. But essentially, it's when people of color are approached sexually or romantically, or were rejected sexually or romantically based on our race. So, for example, some dating apps, you'll see people saying things like, no Asians, no Black people, right? And again, you can see this through sexual hypersexualization, fetishization, or essentially like any other instances of our desirability or our lack of desirability from other people being based on racial stereotypes. And this also even goes back historically. I used to do a workshop. The first workshop I ever did when I was like, maybe like, I don't know, 20, 21. And it was at Brock University, and it was on stereotypes of Black women based on like colonial history, or based on colonization or something like that. And one thing that I would often bring up is how sexual violence has been used as a war tool, as a colonial tactic against people of color, especially women of color, for years, and still is, right? And stereotypes of Black women, like things like Jezebel and man-eaten, sapphire, all these kinds of different terms that we hear that kind of stereotype Black women into different categories, are even used to this day to justify violence against us, sexual violence specifically, in court, in media, in different areas. So really understanding the historical context of this, and how it seeps into present day. But sexual racism is something that that a lot of us unfortunately have experienced and do experience on a regular basis. I know that somebody out there who's listening has been on Tinder and got the hey
I've
chocolate mama.
Hey chocolate girl.
The hey chocolate mama.
Hey chocolate girl.
Yeah, I know you got it. I know it. We all have. I remember I actually had a friend in university. He had dreads, and he cut his dreads because he was so tired of white women touching his hair.
Oh my goodness.
And I remember him having an experience on Tinder where, again, he got the hey, I've never been with chocolate before type of message.
Right. And actually, you know what? I know that on my platform, I make intent to talk about, women and our stories, but I want more men to speak up about that. Right? Because I think that when you don't speak up about it, it makes it seem like you guys are just, but there's so much fetishization of Black men. Like, y'all need to talk more. Like, so much.
And I hear it all the time. I hear these stories all the time.
Yeah.
And they often, a lot of my friends, Black guy friends, especially like the straight ones, will often make jokes about it and be like, yeah, this happened. But I'm like, nah, we can talk about it. Like, that really sucks.
Yeah.
Like, that's really not cool.
Because I feel like then it adds this added layer of like sexualized pressure to perform, to be constantly just ready to, pardon my French, but slang dick. Like, it's not like, like it's
always. And then they come in and they're like, I don't know. I don't know what you're expecting, but I am not 50 Cent. Like, I am not every Black man you've ever seen in the media. And it's true. It's that, and they see it. I think Black men see it a lot and feel it a lot more than they actually talk about. And I know that with Black women and femmes, same thing, that pressure to perform. I remember I used to be so insecure growing up about the fact that I didn't have a fat ass. I remember girl, I was so, to this day, I'm still a little insecure about it, but I've learned to just work with it and appreciate what I do have.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where I used to think like, I know someone's going to expect me to come into the bedroom just a donk, They just want me to walk in with a whole truck, and I'm walking in like kind of flat, just like, hey, hi, and I'm like, again, that's a stereotype of Black women where it's like big butt, big, the perfect kind of like,
that hourglass
shape,
Coke
the
bottle,
hourglass. Yeah,
whatever.
that's the word,
Yeah.
hourglass figure. And I'm like, we're all built so differently,
Yeah.
just because this is what you may have seen on TV or in a music video, it doesn't mean that's how we all are going to show up.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to feel desired when you don't
Mm-hmm.
fit into certain stereotypes of what Blackness should be can be really tough.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. Wow. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. I feel like we ended it on a little bit of like a heavy note, but it was really good to dissect it because I felt like when I was watching your content, I was like, sexual racism and the example you gave, I was like, wow, we've all been through this, but we just didn't have the language to really
Right.
say what it was. And that's a lot of us. It's like we experience things. And now as we have these conversations, we're in a better place to say, yeah, like I recognize that for what it is now. I have the language to speak to it. So thank you
Yeah.
so much for this conversation. Let's end off this portion of our conversation. I just want to give you the space. If there's something you feel we didn't touch on, we didn't cover, any tip you want to give with regards to our sexual health, you have the floor to do so. But this has been great. Like, thank you, girl.
No, thank you. This has been so dope. And I appreciate you, providing this space to have these kinds of really candid conversations. I would say my sexual health tips that I will leave folks with, pee after sex. If you have a vagina, pee after sex.
I forgot about that one. Yeah.
It's really important to flush out that bacteria.
Yes.
Drink a lot of water. Everyone drink a lot of water. Make sure you're checking your condom and dental dam expiry dates, your lube expiry dates. Make sure you're checking all that. Prioritize your pleasure.
Yeah.
Practice ongoing consent. If it helps you feel more comfortable, again, make a safe word. And in the most simplest terms, have fun. I think when I talk a lot about reclaiming my pleasure, especially as a Black woman, I think that's one thing that, was often kind of felt left out from my sexual experiences for a long time was just have fun, right? Like I always had this idea that it was for the other person, especially when I have sex with men, that it's like, it's for them. It's about them feeling good, that I forgot that I'm supposed to enjoy it too, right? And so, have fun, try new things, do things that make you feel good, figure out what you like, masturbate if you're comfortable with that. Like, have fun, just have fun.
Just because you mentioned it and it just came to mind before we switch gears, what does reclaiming your pleasure as a Black woman, what does that look like to you?
For me, honestly, I was about to say, see, my mind runs in TikToks these days. Yeah. So I was about to say, for me, I really like corn.
Yes. That's a good one.
But I would say how it's looked has been really, I know it probably sounds corny and a lot of people talk about it these days, but healing my inner child has been a big one. Looking back at, and that's a lot of the work that I do with my therapist, who I love, is looking at the root of where my sexual foundation started. When I started having sex early, I told you, as a young teenager, and I had not great experiences. And so really looking back and understanding what I deserved, understanding, that I'm not that kid anymore, that I have, I'm an adult with agency and autonomy and a lot of self-love and
absolutely.
I know what I like for the most part. And, I think I've really just tried to, again, have fun. I've tried to learn to have fun. I've talked about the negative experiences. I've talked about the good experiences. And just really, just reclaiming that pleasure and that joy in sex. That's been a lot of what it looked like for me.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you so much again for all the tips, all that you shared. Before I let you go, we're going to switch gears a little bit. This is the BWDIK podcast. So we have a segment where, we just want to get to know the, lighthearted side of our guests a little bit. So I'm going to ask you 4 fun questions. And without thinking too hard, I just want to hear an answer. All right?
Okay.
So the first question is, what's one place in the world that you want to visit? If you could travel there now, your bags are packed and you're going. Where are we heading?
Amsterdam.
Ooh, really? Why?
Girl, I don't know. I've always wanted to go to Amsterdam. I always wanted to live there.
I'm
not sure why. When I was younger, I'd be like, it's because they have like, cafes with weed and everything.
Yeah,
but
right,
now as
right.
an adult, I don't really care about that. But yeah, I just always feel like it'd be a cool spot.
Yeah, okay. Like that. What TV show or what movie or TV series currently has you hooked?
Ooh, what did I recently watch? I watched a movie yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Good Luck to You, Leo Grand. It's on Netflix.
Ooh.
And it is so beautiful. It's about, I won't give I won't spoil, but I'll just say kind of the gist of it. But it's about this woman who is like her husband's passed away. She's older. And she's kind of at a place in her life where she was married for 30 years where she's just looking for like just good sex and enjoying life. And so she hires a sex worker, and it just goes through their interactions with each other and kind of what they learn about each other and themselves. And it's just really beautifully done. It's just really well done.
Okay.
And it's really, it's fun and it's cool and it's sexy. Yeah. I like that movie.
I mean, not that you asked, but I don't know. Are you into Game of Thrones, House of Dragon? That just recently started, and I wasn't on the Game of Thrones train last time, but I'm trying to get on early so I can understand what's going on.
That's fair. My sister loves Game of Thrones. Maybe one day I'll get into it. I'm just not a huge fantasy.
Right. The fantasy and the historical drama type. Yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot going on. Definitely lots of sex too.
Yeah. Fair.
Another one. I don't know if you've Sex, Love, and Goop. Have you heard of that?
With what's her name? Gwendolyn Paltrow.
Yes, something like that.
I watched some of it once. I watched a couple episodes, and I was like, "Ooh, this is fun." But I was also laughing, like, "What is this lady doing?" But there was some cool. There was some cool stuff in there. Yeah, I should finish it actually.
Yeah.
I should actually finish it.
Yeah, finish it and give us a little TikTok on your feedback on it.
I will. I really will.
All right. Next question. Favorite drink? This can be non-alcoholic or alcoholic. What are you currently enjoying?
Chai lattes forever with oat milk and extra cinnamon.
Ooh, okay, a girl that knows what she wants. Okay, and my final question: what personality trait has gotten you in trouble the most?
Stubbornness.
Okay.
Yeah, I am my father's child, and I am stubborn. But I don't even be realizing it until I'm in a situation where I'm like, I fully know that I'm in the wrong, but I'm like, right. No. No.
How you gonna tell me I'm wrong?
Green.
Yes.
The sky, what do you mean it's blue?
Yeah.
It's green.
Girl, that's the Aries in me. I'd be ready to argue you down. I'm like, no, but you see, this is my perspective.
Right? But see, I'm a Pisces, so I'd be ready to argue, and then I cry when I'm mad. So,
right?
So I'm like, the sky's green. It's green. Why does nobody love me?
No way. Yo, that is hilarious. But thank you so much, Lydia, for coming on the podcast again. I appreciate
Thank you for having me.
We're going to have multiple conversations like this. We're going to dive deeper next time you're on. Might do an IG live, like, girl.
Yes.
We're linked. We're going to have more of these conversations because I thoroughly enjoyed this.
Me too.
But before I let you go, just share with the listeners your handle, your TikTok, website if you got it, and just how people can, connect with you.
For sure. No, thank you again so much for having me. This has been so fun. You can catch me on my website is www.lydiacollins.ca. And you can find me on TikTok and Instagram. It's just LACollins_.
Perfect. All right. Thank you for being on the episode again. I appreciate you.
Thank you.